to talk about appreciative advising today, like Ross said, a path to student success. This is just one of the many ways that you can advise students, one of the many theories out there. It's one that I like to use. And so if you're not already familiar with appreciative advising, this will be new to you and hopefully exciting and a new tool for your toolbox. If you are already familiar with appreciative advising, then hopefully you'll be able to leave with some takeaways and some additional tools to put in your toolbox as well. So appreciative advising is housed in positive psychology. So it really is the idea of focusing on strengths for students and for advisors, and we'll get to that as well. And so again, it has open-ended questions, helping students achieve their dreams, attain goals, and meet their potential. It really is student-centered and fully student-centered. So that kind of what makes it a little bit unique. And it's also, we'll get to the resources towards the end, but Dr. Jenny Bloom, who is a former president of NACADA and who's very involved in advising, she is the one who has kind of developed this advising style and advising theory. There are 6 phases to appreciative advising. They all start with D's, which makes it a little bit easy to hopefully remember these. And they're in a circle because you might not use all of them, or you might use them in slightly different orders. And so we'll talk about each of them individually. But again, there are 6 phases to this particular advising style. The first phase we're going to talk about is disarm. And you've heard it said, you never get a second chance at a first impression. So you want to make a positive first impression with the student through building rapport and creating a safe and welcoming space. So what does this look like? There are kind of 4 main features to this phase. The first one is the warm welcome. So how are you welcoming your students? Do you smile? Can they see your smile if it's covered up by a mask? Maybe smiling with your eyes. Again, shaking hands, unless we're in the middle of a pandemic, of course. But what does that look like? If you have an advising center, do you come out to greet the student? What does the student see when they come in? Having a safe and comfortable environment. What does your office look like? With Zoom, we also had to think about, do we have a background? What does my background look like? Where are we situated? Can the students see us well? One practice that I have done is I sit where the student sits. So I have a chair in my office. That's not the one behind me that everyone can see, but there's another one kind of in the corner, and that's where my students sit. So I can kind of face them. There's no barriers between us. My desk isn't between us. But one day I sat there to see, okay, well, what does my students see? Well, you notice that I have windows. At certain points in the day, that sunlight comes in and my students can't see because they're looking right into the bright sun. So I've since learned, okay, I need to shut the blinds at a certain time of day. What can I put on the wall over here that my student sees? Because all of my fun stuff is kind of behind the student. So trying to situate those things so the student feels comfortable. Using appropriate self-disclosure. And I say appropriate because again, you've got to find that kind of balance, but decorating your office in a personal manner. Again, you can kind of see behind me some of the things that are on my wall. And, a really easy discussion topic for me is, gosh, I really love David Bowie. Great. And so then we can kind of share that common interest, or maybe the students don't know who he is, and that, allows me to share that information with them as well. But that appropriate self-disclosure, pictures of your family, if you feel comfortable with that, or just things that you like, quotes that are important to you, that sort of thing. And then, of course, appropriate nonverbal behavior. Are you smiling? Are you have an open stance? Do you have the desk between you? So just really thinking about how can you make your space and the way you welcome the student in, how do you disarm that student? So in this example, which office is more welcoming, right? You have the office on the left with the Post-it notes and the books and gosh, a banana peel just kind of laying out there. I'm not going to lie, there are days my office has probably looked like this, especially during times that it's really busy. But then you look at the office on the right and imagine yourself coming into that office. There's nice warm lighting. The desk itself is clean. You've got a plant in there. It's just a much more welcoming space for your students. So thinking about, what your office looks like. So now I want you all to kind of brainstorm 5 things that you can do to make your office more disarming. It can be super specific, it can be more general. So come to yourself, think of 5 different things. And then if you want to share one of those examples, you're welcome to put it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and call it out. So I'll give you all a couple minutes to think of some things you can do immediately to make your office more disarming. Or maybe things I didn't talk about, like what makes you comfortable. I'm a GEP teacher, so I can wait a really long time. With our incoming students, I have to do that quite a bit. So, any thoughts? Candy bowl, yeah. Candy's always a good, well, okay, maybe not in a pandemic, or maybe it is, but candy bowl is a great idea. And brochures, yeah, physical things the students can take with them. Oh, that's great. I like the counseling center, pictures of family. I love that, the cards for the counseling center. Thank you, Natalie. Thinking about what your students see. Yeah, the book, having that, we got lots of stuff in our office of the books and inspirational quotes. Yeah, pictures of your cats. Students miss their pets, so have pictures of your pets. More decorations aren't just certificates. Yes, your Dwight bobblehead. I talked about The Office in my GEP class yesterday, and I was shocked at how many students haven't watched it, but great. Student art, yeah. Oh, these are so great. See, thank you. These are very specific and so good. And I'm getting ideas. I love the counseling center cards idea, just to normalize that process. I actually have a candy machine that students can turn the knob and it puts out jelly beans. Obviously, I'm not using that right now. So candy, I think, is a good idea. Yeah, these are wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. Those were such great ideas. Keep thinking about that for the future. Like, what can you take away as far as ways to make your office more welcoming? I love all of those ideas. And don't feel bad if your office isn't immediately disarming right now. These are things I hadn't even really truly thought about until I learned about appreciative advising. I don't know how many years students were blinded by the sun coming in through my windows before I realized that was happening. Great. Okay. Oh, whoops. Apologize about that. Hold on. There we go. Discover is the next phase. Are all people like this? The doctor said, like what? Idris said, so much bigger on the inside. So to discover what our students have inside of them, we are going to ask positive, open-ended questions to learn about their strengths, skills, and abilities. This, I think, comes a little bit more naturally to, undeclared advisors, because we're generally trying to get to the crux of what students want to do. But here are some examples of some questions that you could ask, especially if that's not something that comes naturally to you. Since coming to Missouri State, what is something you've accomplished that you're proud of? If money were not a consideration, what would you do with your time? What is something you could talk about for hours without getting bored? When watching a documentary, what topic would you choose? Other examples could be, describe a time when you felt really good about work that you did, or a time that you impacted someone's life. Now, these are more specific to like kind of just general goals and things like that. But this is also where we could include questions like, tell me about your family, or do you have pets at home? Some of those more kind of personal questions, if you feel comfortable with it. But these are very, I think, good examples that that any advisor could ask any student. Dream is a little bit similar, but this is really where we're kind of finding out about what the students want for their future. Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken winged bird that cannot fly. Some examples of these questions are, when you were 8 years old and your aunt asked you what you wanted to be when you grew up, what did you say? What are you saying now? Which I think is a great question, because you think about at 8 years old, maybe you didn't have all of the stuff that adults think about now, like, well, college is going to be expensive, or how long am I going to be here, or where do I want to live? I just wanted to be a scientist and work in a lab. Clearly, I'm not doing that now, but that kind of gets, the advisor thinking about what the student's, goal might have been. Like, why did I want to do that? Well, I wanted to find cures for diseases. I wanted to help people. Well, guess what? I'm still helping people. It just looks a little different. Magazine question. It's 10 years from now. You're on the cover of a magazine. What magazine and what for? You run into a friend you haven't seen in 5 years. What do you tell them that you've been up to? And this is a great question, because this is kind of about the time that students might be graduating. So essentially you're asking them, what do you want to be doing in 4 years or 5 years? But when you give them this example, it really helps them think about it in a more concrete way, especially the more detail you put into it. Like, you run into a friend from high school on the street and you haven't seen each other in 5 years. It's 5 years from today. What do you tell them that you've been up to? And so these examples, I think, are really useful for helping students with that brainstorming, thinking about their future. And if students don't know the answers to these questions, and sometimes they may not, it takes some thought, right? Like, I haven't thought about what magazine I'd want to be on the cover of. Tell them that's okay. Say, if you don't know the answer, that's okay. Move on to the next one, or give them some time to think about it. Okay, so before we move into design, does anyone else have, and feel free to just pop them in the chat, but questions that the stress ball, sorry, I'm getting back to the magnets. Yeah, I love that too. I love these examples. But other questions that you might ask students to help kind of dig into what their goals might be, or just to find out. So we're kind of combining the discover and dream, but what are some of those questions that you might ask students? I think sometimes even a question like, what do you like to do? It seems so basic, and it seems like something, and I apologize, they're doing yard work outside my window right now. So if you hear any background noise, that's a weed eater out there. But you might even ask a student, what do you like to do? And it just seems like a really simple question, but I have found that students will open up and say, oh, well, I like to do this in my free time. And that can help you kind of determine what they might want to do long-term, or what kind of hobbies they have. This is great. Oh, what kind of job life they see for themselves? Do they want to travel? Work by themselves? Yeah. So another question you might ask, and I don't think I included it on here, but what do you see your work life, like, what does your work life look like? Like, if you were to picture your perfect work life, what would that be? And I think that's a really good question too, because we don't always think about that, like what we want to see ourselves actually doing in our job. Oh, I like the class. If it didn't matter about requirements, you could just take an elective and it could be anything. What would it be? That's a really good one too. Yeah, your favorite class in high school. TV channels, that's a good one. When you're channel surfing, because that really, yeah, you always get those certain things where you're like, where do I usually end up? Mine's typically a movie channel, but yeah, I love that. Ultimate dream job, what that might, I like that too. Even if it's impossible, and what might that be? And that's a really good question, David, because I feel like students, they're going to be applying for jobs that don't currently exist. Like when I was in college, a social media manager did not exist. Of course, that was a long time ago. I mean, I'd be a great example, but jobs like that don't exist yet. And so really dreaming what that might look like for them is totally possible. Hi, crazy dog lady. Yeah, what kind of breed of dog, maybe. That's a really good way. I like that. Oh yeah. Yeah, I think, yeah, definitely observing those kinds of things. If a student has, tattoos or some kind of body art, or even just like jewelry that looks kind of special, things like that, or a pin. Yeah, I love that. Great. Wonderful. Those are all so great. I really appreciate this so much. Okay. So design is where we're really putting this into action. So setting goals is the first step in turning the invisible into the visible. This is where you're going to help students co-create a plan for making their dreams a reality. Some examples of things that you can do with students during this phase are, have some SMART goals worksheets available. You can do a quick Google search to find these sorts of things, or if you reach out to folks who teach JEP 101, I have some worksheets that I use with my students. And of course, SMART goals are those goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. And so helping students understand, what a goal is, and therefore be able to set those goals for themselves, because a lot of students may not have actually created real quote unquote goals before. If you have a student that's more creative, have them do a vision board, and this could be something done electronically through Pinterest, or even just through some apps that are available now. Or if they're like, kind of old school, so to speak, and they want to do, cut and paste kind of a thing, pulling some magazines together or other things to help them create a vision board that they can put up in their residence hall room or in their apartment. And that way they get up and they see it every day. Like, what's my goal for 2021? Or for 2022, and how can I achieve these goals? And so just have something that really encourages them every single day. And then more specifically, as an advisor, get in the habit of asking things like, what can you do in the next week to move one step closer to at least one of your goals? Or if there's a specific goal that you all have discussed, ask really specific questions about that, helping them understand the progress that needs to happen to achieve their goals. So yeah, this one's a bit more concrete and a bit more kind of depending on the student themselves. And this goes kind of outside of the quote unquote scope of what we typically think of advising. But I think if we're really wanting our students to achieve the best selves that they can, this is something we should be open to talking to them about as well. Okay. Another activity is thinking. It's called Back to the Future. And so hence the example there. And no, the second movie's not my favorite. The third one probably is, because honestly, a Western Doc Brown is pretty great. But the second one is the one I used as the example, because this is where Marty goes into the future. And so thinking 30 years into the future or 20 years into the future, what does that look like? And then working your way back. So kind of touching on what David put in the chat a little bit ago, thinking about what does your perfect work situation look like, or what does this, what does your life look like at this time period? And what are the steps to work backwards from there? Because some people do better with that type of thinking. And so, fun fact, Back to the Future 2 occurred in 2015. We didn't have flying cars back then, or, self-drying clothes or any of those things. But if we think 30 years from now, okay, what do we want our life to look like? And then again, working your way back and setting your goals that way, because it's easy to think, oh, I'll have time to get to it. I'll have time to get to it. But when you put a time limit on it, it puts that urgency on there as well. So an example that I'm going to use, and it's probably, a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, since I personally don't have a PhD, but let's say you're meeting with a student who wants to be a college professor and they want to teach history. Well, thinking about, okay, well, if that's the ideal position for you, like what's the step below that? Well, getting your PhD. What's the step below that? Potentially a master's degree. The step below that, of course, is your undergrad degree, but then also talking about what kind of research you want to do, what kind of topics might you want to address, what kind of institution do you want to work for? And so working backwards, I think, with the student can also just be another way of thinking if they're not able to really think about their goals from the present to the future. Think, okay, the future, and then work your way back. Great. Check the chat real quick. I know, right? Pokemon. Yeah, my daughter loves Pokemon. I love that. Yeah, in 30 years. I know. I think I was just talking about this yesterday about this movie, 2015, and I'm like, this was not happening in 2015. And I think 30 years from now, like, what does that look like for me too? So yeah, 30 might be a little bit of a stretch, but okay, great. So deliver is the next step in these phases. A goal without a plan is just a wish. So the student needs to deliver on the plan created. So you can help them with their plans, you can help them create goals, but then the student needs to be able to deliver on those plans, and you are there to offer support and encouragement. So what is that going to look like? Some examples: celebrate your students' accomplishments. So ask them, this is when you're kind of asking about their goals. So you told me in our last meeting that you wanted to join a professional organization for your major. So tell me about that. Oh my gosh, you're the president? Well, that's great. Celebrate that with your students. Send them off with confidence when they leave your office. Like if they're talking about their next goal, the next step, send them off with that confidence that they can achieve it. You might have students journal their progress towards their goals because they can look back at it later and realize the steps they took and realize how far they've come. This also kind of helps keep their goals at the forefront of their mind and the plans that they have for themselves. And so maybe have them journal that progress and share that with you in advising meetings. A goal execution plan is more specific than just, the design are the goals. And then part of the plan, the goal execution plan, is like, how are you actually going to execute those goals, and then what does that look like, and tracking your progress. And so those are just some examples of ways that you can help the students in this phase, in this deliver phase. Again, just offering that encouragement and being excited for them when they achieve their goals. So again, some of these, like the deliver, dream, and design, kind of overlap in a lot of ways, or dream, design, and deliver, but okay. So the last phase of appreciative advising is don't settle. So advisors and students alike need to set their own internal bars of expectations high. So don't be like Calvin, who says that his life is a lot easier if he lowers everybody's expectations, right? Although to be fair, I love Calvin and I love Calvin and Hobbes, but we don't want to be like Calvin. We definitely want to set the bar high. So we don't want to be satisfied with a C. We want to be like Susie and want to get an A. So we also want that for our students. So the Sanford Challenge and Support Theory, essentially just some brief background for those that aren't familiar. This is a theory that's really based on person and environment interaction. And it's based essentially on challenge and support, determining the student's readiness to accept like work and things like that. So the amount of challenge a person can tolerate, or a student can tolerate, or even an advisor, depends on support. And so if you kind of think of it as like a balance, well, not a balance, there's probably more of a technical term or physics term for this, but teeter totter, that's what I'm going to call it for now. Well, you've got support. If you have more support, then you can accept more challenge, and vice versa. If you're not getting that support, then it's difficult to take on new challenges. So if too much challenge is presented, but the student doesn't have support or advisors, then they will regress to some previous behaviors or like dig their head in the sand and just ignore the challenge without that support. We see this in classes a lot. I feel like when students feel like they're not getting the support they need, that's when they stop turning assignments in, or that's when they stop showing up. Sometimes it is stress and other things too, but think about, well, how much support am I giving these students, and are they getting what they need to be turning in these assignments? And the same thing with us. I mean, we find in our work schedules, if we don't feel like we're getting the support that we need, it's kind of easy to react in the same way, like not want to take on new challenges because gosh, I can barely keep up with what I've got already. But conversely, if there's not enough challenge, our students aren't going to develop, and we don't develop either. And so I think trying to find that balance, and even in our advising relationships with that don't settle, trying to find that right balance of, I'm going to challenge you with this so that you don't settle, but I'm going to give you the support that you need to do it. So some don't settle questions are things like, you've done great so far, but what's one thing that you could do even better? And think about yourself and like things that you've done. Like, I'm doing this advisor forum right now. After it's over, if Ross were to ask me this question, that was great, but what's one thing you could have done even better? That's a great question, because then I can think about, well, how can I improve? Assuming that he's going to tell me I did great, but how can I improve? The next question, if you're going to raise your own internal bar of expectations, what would that mean? Like, do you already feel like you've got the bar pretty high, or could you raise it a bit higher? And what does that look like? And then finally, what would happen if I challenged you to become the best you could possibly become? What would you need to do differently? So an example could be, let's say you have a student who is I'm trying to give a really great example to me, folks that are on here, like an education major, right? You have a student that's an education major, and they want to be the best, they want to be the best elementary school teacher they can be. They're very passionate about it, but asking them more specifically, like, what can you do differently to be even better? Like, what are some things that maybe you're not doing already? Hopefully some of you have heard of the stop, start, continue activity. I think this would be good for don't settle. I use this in my GEP classes, but essentially you have 3 columns. You have a stop column, a start column, and a continue column. And you ask yourself or ask your students, what are some things that you're doing this semester that you need to stop doing? I need to stop staying up till 11 o'clock at night on Instagram. Okay, for our students, it's probably like 2 a.m, but I need to stop staying up late on Instagram, or I need to stop procrastinating in my classes, or whatever. Those bad habits are the ones that you want to stop doing. To start, or what are some things that you need to start doing to be better and do better this semester? And of course, those are going to be things like, well, I need to start attending class. Hopefully they're already attending, but I need to start attending class, or I need to start using my planner, or, I need to start going to bed earlier, or those sorts of things. And then of course the continue is focusing on, because clearly we're doing some things well. So it kind of hits back to that first question. You're doing some things really well. So what are those things? Like, it's not just all stop and start. There's also this continue column, because certainly there are things that you're already doing that are good. So that stop, start, continue can be a really great concrete way for students to kind of understand their internal expectations and how to raise the bar and things like that. So don't let our students settle. I think it's really easy to just kind of assume that they're okay with where they are, and maybe they are. And we've all heard those phrases, C's get degrees, or D for degree, which isn't technically true because you have to have at least a 2.0, but you get the idea. We hear these phrases a lot. And it's really unfortunate, because I think about, well, yeah, C is average, and maybe that's ultimately where the bar is, and you've got some people above it or below it. But how can we raise that bar for our students? How can we encourage them, that it's possible to raise the bar higher for themselves? And so I think about that challenge that needs to be there to help our students grow. And again, even for advisors, and you all are taking the first step. You're here, you're at an advisor forum, during what would typically be your lunch hour, listening to me jabber on about how to take care of our students. And so you're already taking that step of raising the bar for yourself as well. So again, this would also apply to us, like don't settle. Think of ways that you can become even better also. So yeah. So kind of a little self-test here. I'm gonna check the chat again real quickly. Oh, great question, Jamie. How do we balance high expectations with not worsening anxiety in our students? Yeah, so we all know that we have those students that are particularly, and I don't want to pick on like pre-health areas, but or honors college students, for example, but we all have those students that are like high achieving. How do we offer them, how do we encourage them to not settle without also increasing their anxiety? I think, again, it's just that support. And I think it is okay to say, in those situations, I think it's perfectly okay to say, like, if you have a student that's in a class and they're struggling and they have anxiety about, well, I can't make a C, I have to make an A or B. I think in those situations, on a case-by-case basis, it's okay to say, it's okay if you make a C in this class. Like, if you like going through everything and just understanding that the student has done everything and they're having, life happens. I think that's where that kind of support comes in, and just saying like, this is okay. Like, how are you doing in your other classes? So I think that's a really great question. And that's why this theory is it's a challenge, because you have to find, like, every situation is going to have a different balance. And every student's going to have a different need. And so I do think that's yeah, that's a tough one. But that'd be my suggestion, is that, like with everything else with advising, using your best judgment. And if you do have a student that's genuinely stressed about their performance this semester, or if they have anxiety, say, hey, it's okay. Or again, just offer them that support, just even if it's positive, like, you can do this, might even, be helpful as well. Yeah, that's a really great question. Yeah, exactly. I like that. Yep, you worded it much better than I did. Taking the pressure off so students can focus on their ultimate goals. And I think that's true, because like, we all have those students that they have that one class where they're like not doing quite as well in, and they start to panic. And it's like, listen, this is not going to prevent you from graduating. This is not going to prevent you from going to graduate school. This class is not going to prevent you from going to medical school. So I think also, like, painting the bigger picture for them sometimes needs to happen also. Yeah, that's great. Okay, let's see. We can only try our best. Yeah. Yeah, and it's true. I think if students aren't trying their best, we do have to remind them this isn't hurting anyone else. Like I teach GEP 101, and I want my students to do well. If they don't, I mean, emotionally, it hurts to have to put an F on the grade book. Like, I'm not going to lie, but ultimately, I'm not the one that has to repeat the class. I'm not the one that's going to maybe not persist into the spring. And so, yeah, I mean, if students aren't doing their best, it doesn't really hurt anyone else except for themselves. And I think sometimes that's a good reminder too. And then, yeah, prioritizing, that is something we could definitely include in the design phase for sure, because students don't understand prioritizing. In fact, some adults don't. So that's a really great thing to talk about. Yeah, can't give 100% in every area. That's a really good one too. I think that's a really great question. I'm going to add that to my toolbox for sure. And I want to come back to Scott's talk about the prioritizing. So if you're not already, and I can share this with Laura to send out, but I use Covey's quadrants for my GEP class. It's a little bit kind of, I don't know, different thinking for them, but it really focuses on that prioritizing. So for those of you that aren't familiar, Stephen Covey has these 4 quadrants, and essentially they're representing different activities. So there's like not important, not urgent, not important, but urgent, urgent and important, important but not urgent. And quadrant 4 is that important but not urgent. And that's really where you want to spend most of your time, because those are the priorities. Like those are things that are genuinely important to you. They're not urgent because it's not urgent that I run home and spend time with my daughter. Like she's not in a bike wreck or something, but it's important to me. Like spending time with my family is incredibly important to me. So I think, I can send that out, but I use that worksheet with my GEP class, and every year they're always like, that was so helpful. And it's just kind of getting it all down on paper. Like, what are those time wasters? Like, what are those things that are not urgent and not important? Cut those out, when possible, cut those out. So yeah, I think that really helps the prioritizing and goal setting and time management for sure. So I will make a note to send that out. But yeah, those are all really great. Wonderful. Oh, such great suggestions. That's why I love these forums. I learned so much. Okay, so yeah, don't settle. So kind of a self-test, and don't feel like you have to meet all of these expectations, but these are just, again, kind of that don't settle. Like these are questions or statements kind of for you as using appreciative advising and being an academic advisor or working in student support in some way. Think about, well, could I give myself a point for each of these? And this is just something to kind of reflect on yourself. Obviously, you don't have to share whether or not you can give yourself points for these, but I'm just going to read through them. I care for and believe in the potential of each student. And really think about that. Like, do you believe in the potential of every student? What about the students that are on probation? What about the students that are maybe conditionally admitted? Like, how are we really viewing our students? And do we truly believe in the potential of each of them? I possess an attitude of gratitude. I am fortunate to positively impact the lives of others. In lean years, budget-wise, this might be a little bit more challenging to believe sometimes, but I think that that's a really important characteristic of advisors and those of us in higher ed, like being thankful to be able to impact the lives of our students. I acknowledge that I can always improve my advising or student support. So again, kind of that don't settle, like I can always improve, I can always do better. I recognize that my position comes with power and responsibility. Like Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And Uncle Ben was right. It's really, we have a lot of responsibility to our students and they trust us. So what are we doing with that trust? What are we doing with that power? Are we empowering them to achieve their goals, or are we scooting them out the door so they can get to our next student? I am truly curious and interested in students and enjoy learning from them. I learned so many things from my students, and not just the newest like Harry Styles song or whatever. Like my students share so many things with me. And I think having that open mind and open heart to allow them to share that with me helps me to learn from them as well. I am intentionally aware and responsive to cultural differences. Well, gosh, this ties right into our public affairs mission, right? So thinking about how can we be more welcoming in that way? One thing that we haven't discussed specifically, and we've had other advisor forums about it, but do you have your pronouns on your email signature? And it's okay if you don't, but that might be another thing to think about in terms of disarming, like disarming in the digital space. Are you thinking about those kinds of things and cultural and ethnic differences whenever you're talking to your students or meeting with them? So yeah, and being intentional about that, taking advantage of the opportunities that the university offers for developing your cultural competence. Awesome. So some of the resources that I have used, there's also a great book on appreciative advising by Dr. Bloom that I will send out information about because it's not in my references here, but these are some of the references I used for this presentation. And so giving credit where credit is due. And yeah, practicing appreciation to you all. I just want to say thank you again for taking your time to be here with me today and allowing me to share this information with you. Appreciation is a wonderful thing. It makes what is excellent in others belong to us as well. So, yeah. So I'm going to stop sharing. So if anybody has questions or more discussions, I would be happy to engage in that in the time that we have left. So thank you all so much. Yeah, I went a little short, so I rehearsed this, but apparently not enough to get it right. To get it right at an hour, but.
I'm sure there are some people that are A-okay with it running a little short, Christina. So any questions? Yeah, Christina, the chat's lighting up with gratitude. So people are really thankful for you doing this session today on appreciative advising. Any questions?
Ooh, there is one in the chat from Scott. What advice can you offer to those who may own students for 1 to 2 years and to build meaningful relationships? I can relate. So working with undeclared students, if I'm doing my job well, I'm passing students on, right? So it's kind of a double-edged sword. But I think just that's why that disarm phase is so important, because that first impression you make with your student, especially if you're only going to be with them for a short time, is so incredibly important. And it's hard to keep in contact with our students. I'll admit that there's not a ton of students that I maintain contact with after that first year or two, because life happens. I have other students coming in, they're moving on to their major, and that's okay. There's not that expectation there, but I think that's why that disarm phase is so incredibly important. And then of course, just taking that time to really get to know them in every appointment that you have with them, especially if it is that short amount of time. So yeah, that's a tough spot to be in. But yeah, that's why I jump right into, how are you doing? Tell me about your family, or, just kind of those more open-ended questions that are, still pretty safe to ask. So. Oh, the wheel. Yes, Kelly, I can. Let me share my screen again one more time. And we'll, of course, have this. And I'm happy to also share the presentation itself. Let's see. Go all the way back to the beginning. Yeah, so there's the stages there. So, and I will definitely be sharing this out along with the Covey's Quadrant activity. I think that would just be good for advisors to have, not directly related to this presentation, but a tool that I use. But yeah, so disarm, discover, dream, design, deliver, and don't settle. Whoops, I hit my wheel. There we go. Awesome, cool.
Okay. Well, thank you, Christina. Great job. Lots of important information, and really important to embrace appreciative advising and appreciate students where they are at in their academic journey. So great job. Everyone, again, thank you. I'll join in, Christina, and thank everyone for being here today and spending time with us over your lunch hour. Again, next Wednesday, the Advising Language Learners, the Basics and Beyond. We're going to have the opportunity to hear from individuals in the Modern and Classical Languages Department and the Foreign Language Institute to learn more about advising student learners who are interested in foreign languages. So I'm excited about that advisor forum, and I hope all of you will also attend next Wednesday via Zoom. So that concludes this advisor forum. I wish you all the best, and hopefully I will see you again next week. Bye.